Welcome to Instruction Discussion, our weekly look at the latest topics and trends in education affecting schools here on Long Island and schools around the world. Whether you're a teacher, parent, or student, listen for tips and strategies to help you navigate the educational landscape. There's a bell. It's time to start today's Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hello, I'm Kevin Boston Hill, and welcome to Instruction Discussion, where each week we'll examine a recent trend or development in education and its impact on Long Island. Now, we know that the pandemic has been over for a little over a year and a half to 2 years now, but the effect is still being felt by a lot of people, especially when it comes to things like empathy and understanding and how we deal with one another. Just look at the recent headlines and you'll see the rise in mass shootings and all of the other random acts of violence that take place among people. Well, this is because of the way that we act towards one another. But now you take a couple of steps back. We have to remember that usually actions are followed by words. And it's the words that we say to one another or don't say to one another that often lead to these horrible actions. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we, in a world where we have become sheltered and start hiding behind text messages and other forms of technology, how do we now come back out into the forefront and really work with each other in a way that builds on the empathy and understanding that we are so used to? Well, to help us answer this question and to really explore some of the things that we should be teaching our children, we are going to take a look at the Words Matter curriculum. The Words Matter curriculum is designed by PETA's TeachKind section of their department, and we want to actually find out exactly how our children will be able to understand and learn that words do matter when it comes to dealing not only with animals, but with people as well. To further explain words matter and other things that the education division of PETA TeachKind campaign is actually all about, today we welcome back to the classroom friend of the program manager of TeachKind, Lisbet Chiraboga. Ms. Chiraboga, welcome to Instruction Discussion on 90.3 WHPC.
Thank you, Kevin. It's such a pleasure to be on to talk about our new guide that we've launched, Words Matter. As you mentioned, TeachKind is PETA's Humane Education Division, and we're all former classroom teachers. We work with schools, teachers, homeschoolers, and parents around the U.S. and Canada to help them incorporate compassion for animals into student learning. And so, we're thrilled to be launching a new language guide called Words Matter as an educational resource to help young people think about animals as living beings versus inanimate objects. It's a free resource that we developed for parents and educators that provides a fresh take on common phrases with a positive spin and lessons on why language matters. And so we're encouraging parents and educators to use this guide to share these ideas with children in a practical way.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because we know that words do matter in every aspect of what we do. And when you think about the expressions that we have grown up using, such as like there's more than one way to skin a cat. And so when we hear expressions like that, right, we think of it as almost a throwaway line. But when you really examine the words, there has to be another way to say that there are multiple ways to do a project or different solutions to come up with every problem, as opposed to something that's very terrible acting towards an animal.
Absolutely. Yes. So really, with so much negativity in the world, why not use language in a way that encourages kindness to everyone, including other animals who we share the planet with? And it's really an easy switch that can have an enormous impact on the way we view and treat others. So teaching children from a young age to use inclusive language, and when I say inclusive, I mean inclusive to all living beings, is one step toward a feeling of empathy for everyone, including their peers. And it helps them grow into kind adults. So something as simple as calling an animal he, she, or they versus it is an easy way to instill the idea that animals are living beings with feelings, families, and lives of their own, that they're someone, not something. So the Words Matter guide includes fun, engaging teaching tools for rethinking and reshaping our speech to reflect those key values like empathy and kindness for humans and other animals. And it's interesting that you brought up the idiom, the
more than one way,
a cat,
yeah.
right? So you may cringe now when you accidentally say things like "kill two birds with one stone," but the English language is riddled with conventions that reinforce speciesism.
Yeah,
Which is the harmful belief that all other animal species are inferior to humans. And the words that we use have the power to influence those around us, especially impressionable young children who really internalize their meanings, whether consciously or unconsciously, and then act upon them. You know, we now know that animals have the ability to reason. They have their own forms of communication. They can solve problems by means that we can't always understand. Yet many still suffer terribly at the hands of humans. So words matter. And as our understanding of social justice evolves, our language needs to evolve along with it. So just as it became unacceptable to use racist and homophobic language and phrases that trivialize cruelty to animals will eventually vanish as more people begin to appreciate animals for who they are.
And you know, and it doesn't seem like that's such a far leap as well, because we have a lot of comfort animals that go along with us, no matter, to kind of soothe our anxieties in different situations. We have like dentist offices are using these dogs to sit on people's laps to kind of calm them down as they're going through their regular dental checkups or surgery. You have people taking their animals on board planes with them, again, to keep their anxiety levels down. So when we look at it in those terms, that these are actually helpful beings that we really want to take care of and are taking care of us, to the point where a lot of people actually call their animals their children and so forth.
Wow.
It doesn't seem like it's that far of a leap, therefore, to have these changes in our thought processes when we start thinking about not just the cats and dogs that we live with, but any animals that we come across.
To some, this may be a new concept, but our language has always evolved, right? So it's really, like you said, it's a natural step in changing the way we talk about animals to better reflect how we feel about them. And, there are many words and phrases that were used like 50 years ago that most people would not dream of using today, right?
Oh, exactly.
Because we now understand how hurtful and harmful they are. So as we come to learn more and more about animals, not just how they benefit us, right, but how, they exist for their own reasons, and they have their own personalities, emotions. They have the ability to feel pain and suffer. It's high time that we started phasing out harmful words that trivialize animal abuse or perpetuate the idea that animals are objects.
And it's amazing that you say, because I was actually going to bring that up, that animals we know that they do feel pain and suffering just like we do. We know, and you mentioned already, that they can actually reason very much the same way we do. They can they have their own sense of language. They can be taught language. Because there's always been the studies of the gorillas being taught sign language and other animals being able to identify shapes and figures and things like that. So there is an intelligence there. And because of that intelligence, we should automatically almost really treat them as such, as intelligent beings. And when we think of intelligent beings, we don't think of being overly cruel to them, because they're intelligent and they know they have a mind of their own. They think of their own and processes of their own. So what makes animals so different from the rest of us?
Right. And there's a famous quote, I'm not going to quote it correctly, but it's about, it's not about can they reason, it's about can they suffer. So, listen, animals have, all sorts of intelligence that we can't even understand most of the time. But we do know that they feel. And our standards regarding the acceptable treatment of others are conveyed through our language. So, really our nation is experiencing an epidemic of bullying, right? The vulnerable are targets of aggressive behavior. And language is often used to demean and belittle those that are considered other, so especially those who are seen as weak or different. So as educators, as parents, we should use every opportunity to foster empathy for all others, including animals.
How many programs around the country are utilizing the TeachKind curriculum? Not just Words Matter. Maybe you can separate the two of them, but how many schools currently are utilizing that platform?
Wow, we work with hundreds of teachers and schools all around the country, whether it's rural, urban, because, I've never spoken to a teacher or an administrator, anyone who works with children, who doesn't understand how important it is to foster empathy for animals. And I like to call it the lowest hanging fruit these days, because when we're all, most people are concerned about all the trauma that young people have suffered from, the pandemic. There's a lot of focus on social and emotional learning, which is great. And humane education, compassion for animals, should be included in that. Because kids love animals already. So we don't have to try to get them to care about animals. They already do. So if we can just foster that natural empathy, the natural affinity they have for animals, you'll see so many benefits, not just, socially and emotionally, but academically as well. It's really a win-win for all if we do that. It's relatively easy. It's just a matter of being more intentional about it, because, listen, schools generally relegate animal issues to like a science unit, or where they talk about animals, and their body parts, or whether they, what their habitat is. But it's such a great opportunity in those type of teaching units to incorporate some empathy about that animal and their plight in the world. So, when you're talking about, like say fish, do they have scales or do they have fur? And you can, we created a great activity that goes along with that type of science unit, which is very common in the early grades in elementary school, where they're, they want students to identify, like whether they have scales or feathers or fur. And there's a great activity that we have for fish, and you could check off, yes, they have scales, but there's a wonderful video of a fish caught in some type of net, and a Good Samaritan human is, is freeing them. And the fish friend of the one that's caught is staying there close by with his friend while he's in that stressful situation. And then as soon as he's, the human is able to get him loose, they swim off together. So it's such a great way to just show that animals are not just a bunch of body parts, that they are actual living beings, and, they have friends and families as well.
Exactly. And when it comes to children, how many times do they stick around when they see that their friends are being detained for some reason? Maybe a teacher is speaking to them a little bit after school or something, and instead of them just running off home by themselves, they wait to go home with their friends. So because they want to make sure that, one, are you okay? Did the teacher yell at you? And they want to be able to be there to comfort them as they go home, much like this fish did. They wanted to make sure that their fish friend was okay, and that they could help to ease his pain through whatever anxiety he was going through. And that's what our children do all the time.
Kevin, I love what you just did, because you took that activity and you ran with it, okay? And you even broadened it out, which is exactly what you can do in the classroom. So just as you said, after watching something like that, help kids make the connection to, have you seen anyone who needed, like a friend who needed to be comforted? and talk about that situation, because what we need to do more of with children is definitely talk to them about different scenarios that they may find themselves in with animals and with others. Not when they're already in that situation or the crisis,
right,
but before that. So then they have some kind of foundation. They can process what should I do. Like say they, you give the scenario. Okay, you see an injured pigeon with a broken wing, and everybody's walking by. Nobody's stopping. Does that follow the golden rule of treat others the way you want to be treated? And allow children to process and think about it in a safe space. Oh, what could I do? Could I tell an adult? Well, is there anything I could do? What should we be doing? So that when they're in that situation, they can call upon that, foundational processing that they had, so they can take action.
You are listening to Instruction Discussion on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. My name is Kevin Boston Hill, and our guest today is the program manager of PETA's TeachKind program, and which is also developing the Words Matter curriculum, Lisbet Chiraboga. Let me ask you this as well, because it seems, that over the last couple of years, in our schools, there has been very pervasive that we're using the social emotional learning and all that and that kind of thing. But now we're also broadening that into the whole DEIB curriculum, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging curriculum. How soon or how long do you think it'll be before part of that DEIB talk and curriculum will include things like words matter, and we start talking about bringing animals into that equation as well?
That's a great point. And to that end, we have a curriculum for the secondary level called Challenging Assumptions that empowers young people to challenge societal norms like language and inspires them to have empathy for all others, regardless of species, race, gender, sexual identity. And, so there's thought-provoking lessons, inspiring videos, and, helps young people find that common ground. A lot of times we're on different sides of issues, whether it's politically or otherwise, but we're all humans as well, and so when we can talk about how humans look or treat other animals, everyone's kind of on the same playing field there. So it's such a great entry point for many educators who are not sure how to talk about social justice issues with, in their classroom. It can be a charged, very heavily charged subject these days, depending on where you're teaching. But that's a great entry point that we see that a lot of educators have been able to use. And, just talking about how have we viewed and talked about animals throughout history, and then comparing that to how we have thought about and treated and talked about others, just go through different groups, different marginalized groups. How have we treated and talked about them? And, make parallels and, compare and contrast. And it opens up such a amazing world of for students to start thinking about. And this, Gen Z, they have such a disdain for exploitation and injustice. So they want to talk about this stuff. They're hungry for it. And that's what we hear from educators, too, who use our Challenging Assumptions curriculum with students, is that they have such robust discussions in their classroom, and it really broadens the discussion, and that's a win-win for everyone.
No, I think you're absolutely right there, and as far as it being an entry point and being able to broaden those conversations, because when we think about how animals have been portrayed in our literature, especially when we think about our primary students of education, most of the children's books they deal with heavy subject matter, but what do we see the characters at? All the characters are animal characters. So when they're dealing with that subject matter, so then therefore there really shouldn't, like I said earlier, there really shouldn't be that great of a leap to be able to branch off into that more difficult language that we want to get with our students, because they're already used to seeing animals in a particular light anyway, just through the books that they've been shown, whether it's been pre-K or kindergarten or first or second grade. So that idea of teaching empathy for animals should not be that big of a stretch, because they've already been seeing animals in the books that they've read anyway, dealing with a lot of the problems and issues that they face themselves.
Sure, and I'm glad that you brought up children's books, because that is another aspect we address in the Words Matter guide. While there are lots of humane children's books with messages of compassion and empathy and inclusion, which you can, by the way, find at teachkind.org/humane books, there are many classic tales and modern texts that are rife with questionable language and themes, and many that depict animals as willing participants in their own suffering. We're not telling everybody to replace your entire library, though.
Right.
You can still teach kindness using problematic materials. In fact, we encourage it. It's important for young learners to see what's out there and have access to a variety of literature. But it gives gives the adults, the educator, the parent, an opportunity to point out the problems with the ways that people often communicate about other animals. And we have you can visit teachkind.org/reading guide to learn how to address issues like these in some commonly taught stories in schools, and make teachable moments out of those. Like, I'll just give you an example. Everyone knows the classic children's book series Curious George, right? Mm-hmm. And many children grew up identifying with this little mischievous, they call him a monkey, but I think he's really a chimpanzee because he doesn't have a tail. And they follow him on all his big city adventures. But the story inadvertently promotes the captivity and exploitation of animals who belong in their natural habitat by glossing over the fact that he was taken from his home in Africa by the, quote, man in the yellow hat, right? Mm-hmm. And, so we're failing to teach students that all individuals, no matter their species, deserve freedom, respect, and compassion. So, it's just a matter of, we're not saying don't use the book, but we're saying, recognize this, where there are messages of exploitation, and have conversations. Even with kindergartners, I've had conversations like, what do you see here? How would you feel if this was you and you were taken, is he in his home? Okay. Now where is he? Is he still with his family? So you bring it down to their level, so that they can understand. And, children, of course, they always side with family and friends.
Of course.
So, don't be afraid to have those thought-provoking discussions, even with young learners, because that just encourages growth.
No, I totally agree with you on that one. I was actually going to ask you, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are probably thinking, well, this is great that it sounds like you have a whole cadre of curriculum for the primary age students, for the K to 6 group. What do you have that's available for the middle school or the high school students that are available for us to be able to get into this? Does the Words Matter curriculum extend through K to 12, or is it just for the primary grades?
Well, the guide is focused on K to 5, but One thing that you touched on previously was on idioms, and that's, across all grade levels. You've probably heard the old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, maybe words don't cause literal physical harm, but they can definitely do immense damage in other ways.
Yes.
Our words influence opinions and behaviors on conscious, subconscious levels. And, so when we use expressions like kill two birds with one stone, there's more than one way to skin a cat, like you mentioned before, don't beat a dead horse. And, that list goes on and on. So it teaches children on that subconscious level that, it's just normalizing violence against them. Right. And we have, at teachkind.org/idioms, we have posters of the animal-friendly version. So instead of kill two birds with one stone. It's feed two birds with one stone. Instead of, how many ways to skin a cat, there's more than one way to peel a potato. And instead of beat a dead horse, feed a fed horse. And we've seen videos of teachers at different grade levels, from elementary to high school, using these posters with students. And they have so much fun because it's fun, because then kids, I remember one student saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe we say beat a dead horse,"
Right.
Because when you think about it, it's shocking. Like, why are we saying that?
Exactly.
And then it's more fun to say feed a fed horse anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we have to think, where did all these things come from? How did they all originate, these sayings? But that's a whole other conversation to get into.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's something that that you can teach at maybe at the high school level, to have them do the research on the origins of those idioms, so that they can find out, okay, what was going on at the time that those idioms came to be, and is there a better way to say what they were the point they were trying to get across? Absolutely.
And young people love when, you bring up things that they just never thought of, and that's what, our challenging assumptions curriculum does. That's what Words Matter does. It starts this conversation things that people don't even realize. Another aspect we highlight in the guide is how children are taught about nouns. So what were you taught, Kevin, that a noun was when you were a child?
Person, place, or thing.
Person, place, or thing, right. But wait, what category are we telling you to put the animals in?
Exactly. You would have to go into the thing, because it's not a person. We're not taught that an animal is a person. It's definitely not a place. There's only one category left.
Yeah. So if we classify them as things, we're perpetuating the idea that they're inanimate objects, no different from tables and chairs. But, Kevin, tables and chairs don't experience life or death consequences if you tire of them and return them to the store. Right. And they also don't feel pain or need food and water as animals do. So, I talk to children about this when I was teaching, but even when I talk about this with adults, they have this, moment where it really hits them. Yes, I was taught this you're taught this at a young age, and you carry that, your whole life. Exactly. And you don't even realize it.
You're absolutely
until
right.
It's pointed out to you.
No, you're absolutely right about that.
That's a conversation you can have with all grades, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of educators are getting on board with adding an additional category for animals. Because I tell you, Kevin, at PETA, we feel that animals are people, but in a practical sense, to teach, young children, we encourage teachers to add a separate category for animals. And we have, practical worksheets, that have a separate category for animals, and it's wildly popular with over 4,000 downloads on the popular teaching site Teachers Pay Teachers, and it has great reviews.
Excellent.
So you can go to teachkind.org/nouns to check that out as well.
Well, we would certainly like to thank our guest today, Program Manager of PETA's TeachKind program and the new Words Matter curriculum guide, Lisbet Chiraboga, for coming on to our show today.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It was a pleasure.
Once again, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and thank you all for listening to Instruction Discussion right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.